Hello, glad you can join us for another episode of Let's Talk Change. My name is Debbie, and I'm just hanging out around the water cooler here to take your questions on organizational change management. Today's question comes from a viewer who asked, where do we even begin creating a user readiness strategy? They went on to say they're a pretty small organization and don't really have a full change team. So they're used to just sending out a few emails, but they said it doesn't really seem to be giving them the results that they want. So even if your organization is larger and you already have an entire change practice built, read on, listen on. Hopefully, I will share some tips. And if you're brand new to the user readiness or user adoption practice, hopefully, I'll share some insights that you can take forward into your own organization. Now, if you're not familiar with AdCar or ProSci, I do encourage you to go look them up and do some research on them because this AdCar model is really prevalent. It's what I've used for the last 15 years as a foundation for all of my user readiness planning and user adoption practices that I've helped organizations set up. And AdCar stands for 5 things: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And it really does serve as the founding blocks for driving successful change, right? Awareness is what's changing, right? Desire is why is it changing and how is it beneficial to me? Knowledge is the training piece. I feel like organizations usually have this one down because what I hear a lot is, well, we just send an email with a link to some training. So they at least have a good starting point for how to change and the training piece of it. Ability is focusing on the skills and behaviors and aptitude for people to actually make the change. And reinforcement is the support of supporting people ongoing. So those are the core components. I encourage you, you can do more research and go a little bit deeper, but I did want to introduce you to that in this video because it is really a good foundational starting point as you begin to set up your own change practice or advance a change practice that you may already have going on in your organization. So I'd like to share my top 5 tips when you're building a user readiness plan or creating your own change strategy within your organization. The very first one is considering the user readiness trifecta. This ties very nicely into what we talked about on the previous slide about AdCar, right? The 3 things you want to consider in any change initiative are awareness, training, and support. Right? So how are you going to communicate what's changing, why it's changing, what is the call to action? How are you going to train your users? Are you just going to point them to some videos? Are you going to have custom and tailored training programs that they can attend? And how are you going to support users? Knowing that they're going to have questions, should they call your help desk? Do you want to create an intranet site or FAQ? So you really want to think through all 3 of those areas when you're building a user readiness strategy for whatever change initiative you're looking at doing. And as you're doing that, as you're thinking about the right awareness, training, and support plan, know your organization's, I like to call them the 3 C's: your change capacity, culture, and competency. So change capacity is really about thinking through how much change can they really handle. First, how much change are you going through as an organization? And then second, how much change can they actually handle? Because if you're at one time, let's say at one time everyone's working from home, now you're doing online events, and then you decide, hey, we're going to upgrade our operating system, we're going to switch our collaboration technologies, we're going to move to a different phone system. That's a lot of change that people are needing to deal with while you're still asking them to be productive and while they're trying to balance this whole new work-life scenario that's playing out in today's world. So really think about the change capacity. How much change is happening and what is realistic for people to digest at any one point in time? And there are different options. You can spread out the changes sometimes if that's an option for you. You can bundle the changes. There's different ways to market and advertise these changes where it doesn't seem so overwhelming for users. But the first thing to do is understand how much is changing at one time. The next thing you want to think about is your change culture. And the best way to assess this is to think about the last time you made a big change. You could take a look at the work from home situation, right? When everyone was just required to work from home pretty much overnight, or the last time you upgraded to a different technology or made a process change to how people, fill out expense reports or whatever that looks like. How did people react? What was the culture? Did you have a lot of early adopters of people that just they go with the flow? Whatever you tell them to do, they do, no questions asked. Or did you have a lot of laggards and people that pushed back on the change and they questioned it and they just really needed a lot of help and they were uncertain? And right, so think through your change culture, because that question's really going to tie into the trifecta, right? How much awareness do you need to do, and how much, hand-holding do you need to provide based on your change culture? Because honestly, if you have a lot of early adopters, you probably don't need to do a whole lot, because they're going to buy into it. They're just going to do whatever you tell them to do. They get excited about change. But if you have a lot of laggards, you want to spend a lot more time building out your awareness, training, and support strategy so that users really feel like they're supported as they're making the change. And then lastly, you want to think through your change competency. This is really answering the question, how likely are people to actually change? Right? So just because they're excited about something doesn't mean they're actually going to do it. So this is basically asking, can you really leave people to their own accord? Can you just send out an email with a link to some training and people will go and figure it out? Or are people waiting for you? Are they waiting to be handheld through the process? Right? And again, it kind of ties into culture as well, but it's how competent are people to actually learn and take action on their own? Like, do you have to watch over them and make sure they're doing it? Because this is going to tie into how you build out your training and support strategy, right? Of what type of training is right for them and what type of support. Will they just go to an FAQ and self-serve if they have a question? Or are they going to be calling you every time, they need help with something? So understanding your change capacity, culture, and competency are really going to help inform your readiness trifecta, which is your awareness, training, and support plan. And as you're thinking about this, specifically here, I want to talk about awareness. So as you're thinking about your awareness plan, right? Awareness is telling people what's happening and why it's happening. Make sure that all of your communication ties into the value for your target audience. So I'll give you an example. Very often I see organizations, they'll send me their email campaign and say, hey, can you take a look at this? And I look and the first thing I see is, hey, we're switching to this new process because it'll help increase your productivity. Like, what user wants to hear they're not being productive enough? Right? That's not a good value message for your end users. A personal example, right? I have a friend who is a diehard vegetarian. And let's say I went to this brand new steakhouse and said, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing ever. You have to go try it. And I'm really, advertising and driving awareness of the steakhouse. They don't care. That's not a value to them. They don't eat meat, right? So again, when you're thinking about defining the value, because that's really critical in getting users excited about a change, this is not the value to you as the person writing the message, or it's not the value to the decision maker that decided on the change. It's the value to the receiver. How is your user going to recognize that change as a value to them? So that is really a big piece, and probably I would say the most important piece when building out your readiness plan. Because if you can't create the desire to people, for people to want to change, it doesn't matter how much training and support you throw at them, they're just going to push back. So which brings me to the next point, which is about building out a training program. So training, especially if you're training on technology or a process change, it's not just about the feature function. It's about the why, right? It's, well, why would I use this? How is this relevant for me? So it's building out training in the form of scenarios so they can see themselves working through a process or working in new technology, whatever that change is. It's not just a mere how-to, but it's the why. And that's really critical as you're designing training. And it's really for anything that you learn in life, right? I use analogies a lot in these videos, and I like to use a gym analogy. You've probably heard it if you're watching several of these videos. But let's say you joined a gym and someone just shows you how to use a machine, a chest press machine, for example. If you don't know why you would use that, and if you don't have the desire to like build up your chest muscles and get stronger that way, that means nothing to you. Simply showing you how to use the machine, you're not going to go back to it because you don't really understand why you would. So training for applicability and not just the how-to, really critical as you're thinking through building out your training strategy. And this one is really big, of making sure you're extending your reach with champions. Peers like to learn from peers, whether it's a friendly competition, whether it's just supporting one another. In most organizations that I've worked with, I find that people are more comfortable going to one of their colleagues and saying, I'm not quite getting this. Can you help me out? Versus going to their manager or someone higher up in the organization. They don't want to admit that they don't know what they're doing or they don't get it. So they're more comfortable reaching out to their peers. So peer champions can really be your biggest allies and your biggest evangelists when driving a big change in your organization. So I encourage you, they could be early adopters, they could help with training, they could help with awareness, they could help with support, they can really help with any of those items in the trifecta. And I will have an upcoming video on tips just for building out a champions program, so stay tuned for that. But just know, really consider champions as you're building out a change strategy, because they can really be your biggest allies in getting the rest of your organization to move over really quickly. The last one is really important. One of the things I find happens very often is an organization breaks out their technical and process change and the user readiness change as two separate projects. And what they do is they say, well, you know what? We're going to implement the process first, or we're going to deploy the new technology onto everyone's desktops. Then we're going to start communicating. This is honestly one reason why you get a lot of pushback, because our human bodies and brains need time to process information. So if you wait, and this actually happened to a customer I worked with, they waited, it was Friday afternoon, and over the weekend, they were going to be making all these technology changes. They were going to be ripping out desk phones and upgrading to new technologies. And they waited until the very last minute because they didn't want anyone to get, alarmed or scared about the change. So what happened was they basically just told people at the end of the day on Friday, oh, by the way, Monday morning, you're going to see X, Y, and Z. You're going to see all these changes. And sure enough, Monday morning rolled around and all these changes were implemented, and nobody knew what to do. Right? It was like, oh my gosh, there's this change and that change, and I have a meeting at 8 o'clock and I don't know how to log in and I can't do this, and where's this process, that website's no longer there, and it was chaos. So my advice to you is build out your plan, your user readiness plan, in parallel with the actual change that's going on. Whether it's a technical change or a technology change or process change, build out your readiness plan alongside it and communicate early. Make 60 days in advance, 30 days in advance. Let users know, hey, you know what? We're going to be making this change. Here's why we're making it. Here's what we'd like you to do. Maybe there's no action right away other than to go learn more, right? They don't have to start using it right away, but it gives them time to adapt, right? And adopt and say, yeah, I'm on board with this, or it gives them a place to answer, to get their questions answered, versus waiting until they're actually challenged to use or implement the process while they still have questions. So plan early, communicate early, start training early, and bring users along on the journey. It also helps users feel like they're part of the solution and part of the conversation versus something that's just forced upon them after the fact, like they're an afterthought. So it's all perception. So plan early, integrate your readiness plan along with the actual change that's happening, and then plan early, communicate early, obviously communicate throughout, and then make sure you have an ongoing plan to support your users. I always like to call this the New Year's resolution effect, right? Where think about When New Year's rolls around, everyone's super excited and they're going to lose weight and they're going to go on a diet. And then what happens by February? All of that goes out the window and Valentine's Day rolls around and everyone's eating chocolate again. Right? So you want to have a plan to support users to make sure that that momentum you've gained keeps going. So there you have it, a few tips for building your own user readiness change strategy. As always, we'd love to hear your experiences, so feel free to add any comments or tips that you have of what you've done within your own organization below. We have lots more videos to come, so subscribe to this channel and keep those videos front and center whenever you join YouTube. And if you have questions that you'd like me to consider for the Let's Talk Change series, feel free to enter those questions at aka.my/question. And if your organization is brand new to change management, I invite you to sign up for my workshop. We'll be doing some getting started with change management workshops, giving you a step-by-step process for getting started with change. And you can sign up to receive more information on that at the same link, aka.my/question. With that, we will log off for today. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.